Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Feel your max with Brooks Running and the all-new Ghost Max 2. They're the shoes you deserve, designed to streamline your stride and help protect your body. Treat yourself to feel-good landings on an ultra-high stack of super comfy nitrogen-infused cushion that takes the edge off every step, every day. The Brooks Ghost Max 2. You know, technically, they're a form of self-care. Brooks, let's run there. Head to brooksrunning.com to learn more.
I think it's just vibes. So here it is, the Lamb of God. So you got to have some shepherds come by and go, "Yep, that's the Lamb of God."
Okay.
Well, there's your problem right there. You left him in the manger. Wait, you can take him out of the manger? Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan.
And I'm Dan Beecher.
And you're listening to the Data Over Dogma podcast, where we increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, and we combat the spread of misinformation about the same. How are things today, Dan?
Oh, it's the most wonderful time of the year.
It's getting to be
or
that.
so the song says. Not technically for us in our actual timeline, but for the people hearing this, by the time this gets out to the world, it will be officially Christmas time.
Yeah, well, the radio stations here in Utah have been playing Christmas music for a few weeks now. So, and I just received a package, or probably my wife received a package with a bunch of candy cane shaped throw pillows. So, colored and shaped throw pillows. So, yes, it is definitely that time, and it's not even Thanksgiving yet.
Yeah. Although by the time you're hearing this, it obviously has been Thanksgiving. If you're Canadian, it was Thanksgiving like a year and a half ago. So, that's, but yes, we thought this is one of those rare moments where you and I, Dan, the two overburdened with ADHD guys, actually planned ahead enough to get a Christmas thing to happen before Christmas. So I'm very proud of us.
It didn't work for Halloween, but gosh darn it.
Every now and then we can make it happen if we're 4 weeks ahead of plan or whatever. But I will say this. This is a good one. I have a hunch this is going to be a very shareable episode just because we are looking down on all the who's in Whoville and planning to Grinch this thing to death. We're going to ruin Christmas. Is my guess.
Christmas, yeah, is the goal.
So why don't we launch in? It's just one subject today. Let's just launch in, and sort of let's start with maybe because we're just talking about the nativity, right? The birth of Jesus. Why don't you start by giving us an overview, a 35,000 foot look at what we're going to be diving into.
Yeah, because of turbulence, I might bring it up to 37 or 39,000 feet. But yeah, in short, we're looking at the accounts in Matthew, the end of chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 2, and then we're looking at the account in Luke. And Luke's is much larger, and this is where we get most of the traditions that are associated with what we think of as the nativity. And actually, these two accounts, and then we'll talk a little bit about it when we get to these details, but some of the things that people associate with the nativity, for instance, Mary riding on a donkey, Jesus being born in a cave, Joseph being really old, traditions like that, if you associate them with the nativity, that actually comes from a pseudepigraphic text called the Proto-Evangelium of James, or the Proto-Gospel of James. We can talk about that later. But we have Jesus, who probably was born in Nazareth. At least the tradition has Jesus being of Nazareth, but he's got to be born in Bethlehem if he's going to be the Messiah. And so the earliest gospel, Mark, and certainly the earliest writings in the New Testament, Paul, never talk about Jesus' birth at all.
Right.
because it probably just wasn't relevant until questions began to arise as the tradition is circulating. People were like, well, but where was he born? Because it says the Messiah is supposed to be born over here. And so we don't have nativity accounts in the earliest gospel. They're in Matthew and Luke. And traditionally, people think of Matthew and Luke as the middle two gospels. Mark is the first and John is the last. But Luke might be the last. And the two chapters that cover the Nativity might even be secondary additions to Luke. So these are traditions that are being added quite late to the tradition that are trying to cover this gap in where Jesus came from and say Jesus was from Bethlehem because that's where the Messiah was supposed to be from.
Yeah. If nothing else, it explains why the Luke story is so much better and longer and more fun than the Matthew story.
They've had a lot of time to revise and edit and everything. Their deadlines were a lot softer than Matthew's. So,
yeah. And John doesn't cover it either, does he?
Well, John decides to. So you've got kind of a trajectory. So you've got kind of a trajectory where Mark starts with the baptism. And then Matthew and Luke are like, we're going to go back to his birth. And John's like, screw you guys. I'm going back to the beginning of creation. And so the scope of Jesus's mission and identity and everything keep getting pushed further back until, John is like, beginning of time. And then, just skips over what happened with Jesus's mom and dad and Herod. So, So I think we're gonna start in Matthew, and then we'll move on to Luke after that. All right.
And I just went through and just sort of bullet pointed. I just read both accounts, and you gotta say, like as we go through this, one of the things that's going to become very apparent, and I don't know why, growing up, when I heard this story, when this story was told to me, when I would go downtown Salt Lake City to the Mormon Temple Square, which at that time, every year they would do this. They would light all the trees and light up all of the Temple Square, so it was pretty to walk through. And you'd go there at night in the cold, and everybody would bundle up. And then on one of the lawns, they had these life-sized plastic statues,
nativities,
of people. And so you'd have shepherds over here, and you'd have wise men over here on camels, and you'd have, the manger and whatever. And they would a recording, and I know the actor. I actually worked with the actor who did the voiceover for the recording.
Nice.
Robert Peterson's voice would come over and read these passages to you from the Bible, and the different parts would light up as they talk. And I think most of us could be forgiven for not realizing these are two totally different stories that are just completely unrelated to each other. Yeah, there's frequently a harmonization that goes on, and you got to try and squeeze the different parts in together to tell the story. So when everybody gathers around and Daddy reads the Nativity, it's a mashup. It's not either one of these stories, but it's an attempt to try to make them one and the same narrative, and they're not. As we're going to discover. I mean, it makes sense to want to harmonize them like that. Like, yes, you're getting you like, if you want this to be true, then you got to harmonize them because they don't relate to each other. But we'll get to that. Let's just start with Matthew in chapter 1.
Okay.
1 through 17, verses 1 through 17 is just genealogy connecting Joseph to David.
Yes.
So we'll just skip all of that because there's nothing more boring in the Bible than the big gats. All of the big gats are the worst thing in the world. Then you get to the birth of Jesus, and that is so Joseph and Mary are. And help me out with this. I grew up with the King James. It said that they were betrothed. Yes. NRSVUE has it as engaged.
Yes.
But then a few sentences later, Joseph is going to divorce her. So
Yes.
what is the state of their relationship at the beginning of this?
So betrothal in the ancient world, betrothal would frequently happen when a woman reached puberty shortly after, 12, 13, 14, somewhere around there. And for arranged marriages, not all marriages were arranged. If they weren't arranged, it might happen later. But basically, this was a contract, and for all intents and purposes, they're married. So if you wanted to break up a betrothal, that was a divorce. If a man passed away during betrothal before consummation of the marriage, that woman was now considered a widow. So,
wow.
So for all intents and purposes, they are married. They haven't performed the ceremony. They haven't consummated the marriage. So there is another stage to it, but they're considered married. And this is why, for instance, in Deuteronomy 22, where we have the legislation about what's to be done when a man is discovered committing adultery or something, and you gotta, they both get killed. And then there's a question of a virgin who is betrothed, and the penalty is the exact same as a woman who's not a virgin anymore, who's married.
Okay.
Got to kill them both. And then it's only someone who is unbetrothed who is considered not married. So yeah, this is, for all intents and purposes, they were married, even though they had not sealed the deal, so to speak.
Well, and that is, in other stories, that would be less important. In this story, that's a very important point.
Yes.
They have not sealed the deal.
Critical.
Everybody knows this. In this story, Mary just gets pregnant. And Joseph, gentleman that he is, decides he's going to quietly divorce her and not scream to the high heavens about how she is, I don't know, deserving of being murdered, maybe? I don't know what happens to a woman who gets pregnant and it's not her husband's baby.
Well, again, if we go back to Deuteronomy 22, a few verses earlier, if a man comes together and accuses his new wife of not being a virgin, then she's supposed to be stoned. So it was capital punishment. But by this time period, they did not have authorization to engage willy-nilly in capital punishment. And so that wasn't allowed. And so basically, divorce was what was supposed to happen. And then she then becomes a divorced woman.
So, He's planning on that, but an angel appears to Joseph in a dream and says, "Go ahead and marry her." Mm-hmm. She conceived of the Spirit, which that's got to be weird to hear.
There's a lot. That is a pregnant statement, which itself is a pregnant statement. But it is. There's a lot of people have read an awful lot of stuff into exactly what it means to be with child from the Holy Spirit. But the authors probably were not concerned with those details.
Nope. There's a lot of stuff that's thrown into these things that's like, that there's going to be centuries of parsing that happens afterwards. And somebody was just like, I'll just write it this way.
Not my problem.
Right, exactly. Enjoy that, scholars 1,000 years from now, or 2,000. She will bear you a son, and you will name him Jesus, quote, for he will save his people from their sins. Is that what Jesus means?
So Jesus is our transliteration of the Latin transliteration of the Greek transliteration of the Aramaic name Yeshu, or Yeshua as it's written in the Hebrew Bible, and this is a contraction of Yehoshua, which means Adonai saves. And so Yeshu probably means, it is also the Aramaic word for salvation. So it's either salvation or Adonai saves.
And then there's this moment, which I will also need some help with, where the angel in the dream, this is Dream Angel, says that that this is going to fulfill a prophecy. He's just said you're going to name the kid Jesus, and then says this is going to fulfill a prophecy about a virgin becoming pregnant, and quotes that prophecy, and the quote is, "And they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us."
Yes. So lots of stuff going on in this quotation.
Just so much happening.
Yeah.
Not least of which is, you just said name him Jesus. How does that fulfill a prophecy of him being named Emmanuel?
Well, this is being slotted in here for a very specific purpose. So this is Isaiah 7:14, but specifically from the ancient Greek translation of Isaiah 7:14, so the Septuagint. And in the Hebrew, it says, look, a young woman has become pregnant and will give birth to a son, and she will call him Emmanuel. So what's going on here is we've made some changes. Young woman, Alma in Hebrew, has been changed, or has been translated into Greek as Parthenos, which usually more explicitly refers to biological virginity, as if there were a biological virginity. There's not, but to virginity as we think of it. That's not always the case. For instance, in the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation again, in the story of the rape of Dinah, she is referred to as a Parthenos afterwards. Mm-hmm. So it's not incredibly strict. And there's a wonderful paper by a friend of mine named Rodrigo de Souza that talks about whether or not the rendering is theologically motivated. But anyway, Matthew has to appeal to the Septuagint because that's the only way that this has anything to do with a woman being a virgin. So it's this translation gives him the out to be like, oh yeah, check it out, it's a virgin, it's magical, it's divine, it's a miracle, all this stuff. And then
is it likely that the Septuagint is the only version that the author of the Gospel of Matthew knows?
It's the one that's being appealed to here. A lot of people think Matthew would have understood enough Hebrew to know that the Hebrew is different, but there are places where Matthew will fiddle with the prophecies in order to make them fit his rhetorical goals. And this is just one example. We've talked before about, for instance, the triumphal entry where Matthew is like, 2 animals at the same time? All right, whatever. And has
works
Jesus.
For me.
Yeah. So whether or not Matthew knows the Hebrew is different, Matthew is appealing to the Greek. And then it says in the Greek also says shall become pregnant, whereas the Hebrew, most scholars agree, means has become pregnant. And then in the Greek here, it says they shall name him Emmanuel. This is actually a change from the Septuagint, because the Septuagint says you will name him Emmanuel. Either you or he. I'm going from memory, but it's changed to they will name him Emmanuel, which is probably the author recognizing that Joseph is going to name him Jesus. So other folks are going to call him Emmanuel. So and what I think is going on here is this is a little bit of shadowing, not shattering. The angel is like, yes, people you don't know yet, the mythical they are going to refer to him as Emmanuel, meaning God is with us. In other words, other people are going to recognize that Jesus bears God's presence and brings God's presence among them. And so it's kind of a recognition of his future mission. In my opinion, there are scholars who account for it in different ways, but the fact that the author changes it to say they shall call him Emmanuel, I think pretty clearly indicates this is intended to prophesy about other people recognizing Jesus' mission.
Well, friends, the weather outside might be frightful, but that fire is so delightful. And when the weather is crap, you don't want to go out to eat, but you may not be up for taking a lot of time to make dinner for you and your family. I know I'm frequently in that boat, and that is why I find Factor to be so delightful. Factor, it has you covered with 35 different delicious meals every week, over 60 additional convenience options that you can add to your box, like keto cookies, pressed juices, smoothies, just all sorts of amazing stuff.
Because Factor's meals are chef-prepared and dietitian-approved, you're going to love not only how Factor meals taste, but also how they support your goals.
This is the time of year for comfort food, and I love comfort food, but you can feel a little guilty about it. If you want guilt-free comfort foods like home-style chicken and gravy, loaded mashed potato, pork chops, feel-good vegan options like sweet potato and chickpea curry, you're going to have a lovely meal, and it's super easy with Factor.
Head to factormeals.com/50dogma and use code 50dogma to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code 50dogma at factormeals.com/50dogma to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping while your subscription is active.
Fever, cough, congestion. When the symptoms keep coming, but you've got to keep going, you can rely on Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One. Just one dose of Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One relieves up to 9 cold and flu symptoms, helping you get on with your day. Need cold and flu relief? Get Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One and Done Relief. It's comeback season. Use as directed.
It's such a weird... this is not the first time, by the way. There are many times, especially in Matthew, where it overtly says, this happened, and that is a fulfillment of this prophecy.
Yep.
And so it's almost... It's very clearly like Matthew is going through the motions of like, and here's this part. Now you guys can just know that prophecy was fulfilled. He's just ticking boxes as he goes through.
He's going to be like, and then this happened, and I bet you can guess why this happened. So that the prophecy could be fulfilled. Yeah, we know, Matthew.
Right.
Let's go on from there.
Yeah, so we move on to chapter 2, and this is where the Magi come.
Oh, one more thing real quick. Sorry to interrupt, particularly if we've got some lag today. The chapter ends with verse 25 saying, but he had no marital relations with her until she had given birth to a son, and he named him Jesus.
That's true.
Indicating that there had not been the taint of sexual intercourse anywhere associated with Jesus's gestation or birth. So he was free and clear of that territory by the time Joseph arrived. And there's and this kind of makes it difficult to argue that Mary maintained perpetual virginity as well.
Right.
But there are folks who are like, hey, just because it said he didn't have marital relations until he was born doesn't mean he had marital relations after he was born. Just like when I say, yeah, I didn't eat dinner until after I got home from work, doesn't mean I never had dinner ever again. It just means it happened after I got home from work. But
yeah, it could mean you never had dinner again.
It's not impossible. Possible. Yeah. We know what that's all about.
Right. Chapter 2. We've got the Magi who come in. We did a whole cool episode of that last year. Go back and look that up if you want to. The Magi, who we know are not 3 men, but an undetermined number of men, and frankly, when you see how they behave, I don't think we can call them wise men either, because they just come barging into town yelling, hey, where's the kid that's going to be the king of the Jews? Which does not hit the king of the Jews very well. Herod is not happy about that.
Do you mean me? Oh, you don't mean me? What are you talking about?
Are you talking about my son? You better be talking about my son, because I'm not. By the way, we are very clearly in Bethlehem. There is no mention of Nazareth anywhere here.
None whatsoever. Yes.
Okay. So, and also this is after Jesus has been born, but no mention of Jesus's birth or how long this is after the birth.
Right.
Herod becomes furious, brings Magi in to trick them into, go find him and then come back and tell me where he is so that I can pay homage to him too. They follow a star, which as I read it, it was very clear to me that the star moved and physically stopped directly over the house where they're supposed to find Jesus.
Yes.
it's not just in the sky in a guiding them in the direction. It's like follow the bouncing ball sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So they get to the house, they pay homage, they give the gifts, and then they scurry off out of the country, going a different way than they came in, so that they wouldn't get stopped by Herod again, because they had a whole dream about Herod being ready to do some damage.
Yeah.
And then Joseph has another dream. He's visited by his dream angel again, who says, Herod's going to kill you guys. You have to run away to Egypt.
Yes.
Which is interesting because that is also very much just in this narrative, nothing to do with the Luke narrative. There's no mention of Egypt anywhere around that.
And it's precisely because Matthew found another prophecy that he was like, I bet I can get that into the story.
I bet I can squeeze it in.
I'm gonna get it in there. And so has them go to Egypt. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, out of Egypt I have called my son.
Yeah.
So that's it is the desire to have Jesus fulfilling all these messianic prophecies that is driving the narrative.
Yeah.
And unlike what we have in Luke is very different. And then what happens while they are sojourning in Egypt?
Herod dies. Herod. Herod kills all the kids in and around Bethlehem.
Don't forget that one.
2 and under. So, yeah, pretty horrific. And also an event which you would think would merit being told in other places.
Yeah, you would think
in any other places.
Yeah. It's like this guy, he just lost it and killed all the babies that were under 2. That would have merited some mention.
You'd think Josephus might have had something to say about that moment.
And it says in verse 16, he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi, which suggests that this is within 2 years from Jesus's birth.
Yeah.
It
could have been as much as 2 years from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, among other things, means that Jesus would have been born at least, or as much as 2 years before Herod was dead. In other words, that would have needed to be around 6 to 4 BCE, somewhere in there.
Okay. Right. So now. Oh, great! Now you've ruined our whole calendar. Thank you so much for that. If nothing else, that is a good reason to use CE and BCE as opposed
because
to AD.
It's not accurate. Yeah, they didn't have a Y0 countdown.
Right.
That they were like, this is going to screw up all of our computers. The whole economy is going to come crashing down. We better have a census.
Okay. Don't get to censuses yet. We're going to get to censuses. But yes, Herod dies eventually while they're in Egypt. So they feel like they can come back from Egypt. But they didn't go back to Bethlehem. They went to Nazareth.
Yes.
And that fulfills the prophecy that he will be called the Nazarene.
Which is not a prophecy.
It's not?
There's no part of the... So this is usually put in quotation marks. He will be called a Nazarene.
Right.
There's nothing anywhere in the Hebrew Bible that says that. Oh. So other people are like, oh, it's not direct speech. It's just a paraphrase. Well, there's nothing about the Messiah being from Nazareth. What a lot of people will do is they'll point to Isaiah 11:1, where it says there's a root will come forth out of Jesse or something like that. And the word for root there is netzer in Hebrew. And so they're like, if you squint at that, you can say, maybe he's from Nazareth. Therefore... the prophet said he will be called a Nazarene. It's either that or there's something that we have lost, that there was a prophecy that we've lost, or Matthew was just making it up.
Or Matthew was he was so used to wedging in like prophecies that he just threw in one of his own. Why not?
Well, and this is one of the reasons that I think critical scholars would agree that the historical Jesus probably came from Nazareth and was known to come from Nazareth. When it comes to Egypt, Matthew's like, stretching, he's cracking his knuckles, like, check out what I'm going to do. But here, because he wants to fulfill the prophecies, here he kind of has to bend the Hebrew Bible a little bit to fit what sounds like everybody knows about Jesus. He can make up Egypt. He can't make up Nazareth.
Right.
Nazareth has to be there. And so whereas elsewhere the prophecies are driving narrative, here the history is driving his representation of prophecy.
I guess that makes sense. There must be then a prophecy that says that the Messiah will come out of Bethlehem. Is that true?
Yeah, we skipped over it back at in verse 6 of chapter 2. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.
Okay.
So that is what, in that time period, had been interpreted as a messianic prophecy about the Messiah coming from Bethlehem.
So really, the Nazareth thing, to getting him to Nazareth is just a matter of like explaining why this kid from Bethlehem is known as the Nazarene guy.
Yeah, so it's basically like, okay, we had our fun, but now we have to tie it into what everybody already knows about history. Right. And so we got to get him to Nazareth.
Okay.
And you'll notice the text shares absolutely no indication whatsoever that they ever lived in Nazareth. They're like, all right, we're coming back from Egypt, and God is like, go over there. Oh, okay.
Right.
And so they show up in Nazareth, and it makes it, according to Matthew, if you only had Matthew, Jesus had never been in Nazareth before. And
right.
his family wasn't planning on going there. They were just like, God told us to come here. All right, well.
And he's not grown, but this is years after his birth that we're there.
Yes. So depending on when you date it, if it's after Herod's died, so it's after 4 BCE. So he's anywhere from 1 to 3, maybe 4 years old at this point. Yeah.
Okay. And just so that I looked this up just to paint a picture for those of you who are curious. Nazareth is about like 90 miles north of Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is just outside of Jerusalem. It's just a little suburb of
little
Jerusalem.
south of Jerusalem. Now it's like a suburb of Jerusalem. Back then it would have been separate from Jerusalem.
It's
but,
it's a long walk though. It's a
hike. Yeah.
It through some very hilly country apparently is what I was seeing on the map.
Yeah, and Nazareth is in a little bowl between some mountains. It's quite large city now, but at the time it would have been a tiny little hamlet, so there wouldn't have been much going on there.
Yeah.
But it's right at the kind of northern center of the Jezreel Valley. Beautiful area.
Near the Pond of Galilee.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hike to the Sea of Galilee, but it is near it. Yeah.
I will not call it a sea. I've seen how small it is. It is not a sea. All right. Let's go. Let's move on then now to Luke. Because that's basically the end of the birth of Jesus story in Matthew. So Luke tells a very different story. Mm-hmm. Starting with, and I'm just going to start. Don't you get ahead of me now, Dan. I'm going to start with
dream of it.
In chapter 1, an angel appears to say, "Do not be afraid, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife will bear you a son, and you will name him John the Baptist." That's right. The first part is all about John and Elizabeth and Zechariah, and nothing to do with Jesus.
Yes. So just like with Jesus, everybody had to one up the story before and be like, well, what about his birth? What about the beginning of time, Matthew? What about then? And here they're doing the same thing with John the Baptist, because now it's like, we got to go back to John the Baptist's birth. Which is all miraculous and everything as well. So
yeah, and very, very reflective of the Jesus narrative as well, which is very interesting.
Well, and it's probably because there were a bunch of people, and we talked with my friend James McGrath about John the Baptist. It's probably because a bunch of people were like, Jesus was a subordinate to John, and now they're like, oh, but wait till you hear this. Before John was even conceived, they were like, he's number 2. He's the runner-up. He's just a
But he
forerunner.
was really, really important. So there's angels telling them that he's coming too.
Yeah. So he was special. You got that right, but he was always number 2.
So after all of that happens to Elizabeth, where and Zechariah, where an angel comes and tells them about their kid and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get to Joseph and Mary, and an angel appears to Mary, not to Joseph, and this isn't in a dream. And the angel has a name, and that name is Gabriel.
Yeah.
So Gabriel is sent to Nazareth because Mary and Joseph are in Nazareth.
That's where they live. Yep.
Tells Mary that God is pleased with her, and so she's going to bear a son, and you're going to name him Jesus. And he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Which, by the way, I feel like him saying he will get the throne of his ancestor David, he doesn't get that. like maybe metaphorically, but it sounds like what he's saying is, you're going to be the king of the Jews.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem to happen in the story, does it?
Yeah. No. This is what everybody's been waiting for. Everybody has been waiting for this deliverer to come and to whoop the Romans and drive them out so that they can reestablish their kingdom, which is what the Maccabees did, 160 years before with the Seleucids and Antiochus IV Epiphanes. So that's what they're anticipating.
Right.
And Gabriel is kind of like, yeah, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, that's filling them with false hope when he was like, no, this was all a spiritual throne, not a physical, actual, literal throne.
One could imagine a conversation between God and Gabriel afterwards where God says, you told them what? Why? Why did you say that? Anyway.
Or at Jesus' crucifixion, Mary is like, wait a minute.
Hang on.
I wrote this down. I still have it in my scrapbook. It's in the garage. Yeah.
Oh man. So anyway, moving on. Mary goes and visits her cousin, her relative Elizabeth.
Yes.
And little baby John, who's about 6 months old, or 6 months gestated in Elizabeth's womb, kicks, and so that's why abortion isn't legal.
This is a post quickening, by the way.
Yeah,
movement on the part of John the Baptist, and so yeah. Anyway,
so there you go. Mary sings a song, which I am led to believe is called the Magnificat.
The Magnificat. Yes, this is another mashup of praise coming from the Psalms and stuff like that.
Right. And then there's a bunch more stuff about John the Baptist that we don't care about. So then let's move on to chapter 2.
Yeah.
And here's one of my favorite bits in all of this. The weird census where they say, everybody leave where you are and go to where you're from, which, to my knowledge, has not been how any census has ever worked ever and couldn't possibly work and is crazy.
And your knowledge is accurate. They wanted people to be where they lived and worked because they needed to know how much to charge in taxes, and they needed it to be accurate. And if they're like, everybody go to your ancestral homestead, not only do you nuke the economy,
right,
but a lot of people are going to leave your jurisdiction.
Right.
And then you're going to have utterly useless data. It's like, why are your taxes so low? There were supposed to be 1 million people living in your city. And you're like, no, there were just 1 million people who came ancestrally from the city.
Right.
It would be utterly useless. And there are apologists who are like, well, no, there was this census from 115 BCE in Egypt or CE, I forget which one it is, where the instructions were for everybody to return to their hearth. And they think that means your ancestral homestead, and it 100% does not. It quite literally and explicitly means if you're out traveling for work, go home so you can register for the census at your home where you live.
Yeah.
Not where your great granddaddy said you were from.
Right.
So yeah, that's nonsensical.
But it does get us to the city of Bethlehem.
Yes.
AKA
you could call it it is the MacGuffin census.
Yes, it is the MacGuffin census. It gets us to Bethlehem, which is called the city of David.
Yes.
Is that right? Are we just fulfilling a prophecy thing, or why are they keep calling it that?
City of David is a name for the a ridge that kind of juts down a little south of. It's like the Florida of Jerusalem. It kind of sticks out a little on the south, and that's where David's palace was. That was Jerusalem before like the temple was built and all that kind of stuff. So it had that title, the City of David, for a bit.
I just get, you get Jesus, who's called Emmanuel, and Bethlehem, that's called the city. Like, just name things once. I don't want more names.
With Uber Reserve, good things come to those who plan ahead. Family vacay? Reserve your ride as soon as you book your flights. To all the planners, now you can reserve your Uber ride up to 90 days in advance. See Uber app for details.
18 years from tonight, Grant Gill will become a comedy legend when he totally kills it at his improv class's graduation performance. Knees will be slapped. Hilarity will ensue. That's why he's already keeping himself in shape and razor sharp today with wellness tips and tools from AARP to help make sure his health lives as long as he does. Because the younger you are, the more you need AARP. Learn more at aarp.org/healthyliving.
We need to talk about dating as well here, because it says, in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Quirinius was governor in Syria, or legate in Syria, and conducted a census in the year 6 CE.
Oh.
Because after Herod the Great died in 4 BCE, his son Archelaus took over rule of Judea, and he was a moron. And because of his ineptitude, he was deposed in the year 6 CE, and Rome was like, we're doing it ourselves. And so Rome was like, well, we got this territory now that we took over because of that moron. We need to know how to tax it. And so they said, Quirinius, you're closest to Judea. Go run a census in Judea. And so in 6 CE, Quirinius ran a census in Judea, which means that this is a full 10 years separated from after the death of Herod the Great. So, and even though Luke says that this was happening in the time of Herod the Great, so internally, so in Luke 1 verse 5, in the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah. So internally, Luke's story already is contradictory.
Yeah.
It cannot work because it is placing two different events that took place 10 years apart from each other at the same time. In
fairness to the author of Luke, he was writing this well after the fact. It's hard to get all of the facts right.
And probably extra well after the fact, because this might be a secondary addition to Luke, which means might come from like the middle of the 2nd century CE.
Wow.
This might be 100 years after the death of Jesus. And I don't know about you, but I would probably not do a great job trying to write a story about something that happened, 130 years ago, even with Wikipedia.
I was going to say, just Google when the census was, man. Come on.
Yeah.
All right. So they go to the city of Bethlehem. Mary has the kid, wraps him in I prefer the phrasing swaddling clothes, but NRSVUE has bands of cloth. And puts him in the manger because there's no room for him in the guest room. Which is how the NRSVUE, that is not how Robert Peterson said it at Temple Square down in downtown Salt Lake City. What about the inn? Where's the inn, Dan?
There was no inn because the word in Greek is katalima, which usually means some kind of sleeping quarters or something like that. So you could squint at it and be like, that's an inn. But elsewhere, when you have the parable of the Good Samaritan, when he takes him to a place to stay, it's not katalima that is used. When in Luke they describe Jesus prepping for the Last Supper, it's in the katalima in somebody's house. And so this means in either the sleeping quarters or the guest room. And so they are already at somebody's house. They already have a place to stay, but it's too crowded in the bedroom. And so they go downstairs. And the standard 4-room house that would have been prototypical of Judea in this time period would have had a bottom floor where you kept storage stuff. It was a little cooler. The animals were down there. A manger would be down there. And then you'd have a ladder or something that went up to a second floor. And that's where you would sleep. That's where you would eat and things like that. So there's nothing upstairs.
A manger is just like a feeding trough. Is that right?
Yeah. An awful lot of people think manger means like shed or something like that, or a stall. But yeah, it is just a feeding trough. So it would have been a little stone feeding trough that he was put in.
Could be cradle-like. It's fine. Yeah. Okay, so they put him in.
But just to clarify one other thing.
Yeah.
They did not swaddle sheep and put them in mangers to protect them in this time period. This is a laughable myth that people have made up to try to inject more significance into Jesus being swaddled and laid in a manger.
Why? Because he's the Lamb of God? Is that the connection they're trying to make with that? I've never heard that. I've never heard that they...
it's all over social media.
Oh, I'm sure.
But the idea is that, they swaddle him because otherwise they thrash around in the manger and they bash their heads against the stone and they die. It's like, well, they didn't put him in a manger to begin with, but yes.
Why would you put it in the feeding trough? That's not where sheep go.
Swaddling a baby sheep just sounds like such a great idea, doesn't it?
Also, yeah.
Have you tried swaddling him?
I just can't imagine. I love the idea that sheep are so dumb that like the first few hours of their lives, if you don't put them in a straitjacket, they just flail themselves to death.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so that didn't happen. Good. Shepherds. We're going to get to shepherds now. Who, this part baffles me.
Okay.
But I think it's actually kind of cool, and maybe I'll tell you why. But what happens in the Bible in chapter 2 of Luke is that shepherds
stays in the Bible. Sorry,
that's right.
I couldn't resist.
You're right. So the shepherds are watching their flocks by night, so it's nighttime. Did shepherds do that? Do you have to watch them 24/7? Anyway, they're watching their flocks by night. And then angels appear, a heavenly host, or whatever. It's a huge laser light show. They got a full orchestra. Chapel Roan is there. It's a hullabaloo. And they tell these dudes, just a few dudes, hey, go find a baby. Here's how to find it. Which is weird.
You want a baby? I'll get you a baby by 2:00.
It's such a weird thing. Why is it important that the shepherds know and like not everybody else? I'm mystified by this.
Yeah.
Do you have any insights, or is it just a big question mark?
I think it's just vibes. This is the. So here it is, the Lamb of God. So you got to have some shepherds come by and go, "Yep, that's the Lamb of God."
Okay.
Well, there's your problem right there. You left him in the manger. Wait, you can take him out of the manger?
It's just so weird. I kind of like it in part. Well, I think there are a lot of Christians in the United States of America especially with, the whole prosperity gospel thing, where they put wealthy people as sort of the most deserving and the most important of our society, and they kind of biblically justify that. So to me, there's something very lovely about the idea of, hey, the angels being like, you know what, those guys are just chilling. Let's go tell them about it. They'll dig it. And it's not important people. It's not the prophets or the priests of the town. It's they're not waking up everyone at the temple. They're just waking up some dudes who are minding their business with their sheep.
Yeah, it could have been Paul Revere riding through town. The Messiah is coming. The Messiah is coming.
Right.
And then not making it all the way to Concord, and then demanding he be paid an exorbitant amount of money. But it wasn't. They went to some lowly shepherds.
Yeah. So the shepherds do what they're told. They go and they find the baby and they tell the story of the big concert that they got to see. Mm-hmm. And everybody's very impressed by that. And that's the end of the shepherds bit.
Yeah.
And then...
And David was a shepherd, by the way. So they're drawing. There are connections being drawn here.
Okay. There's that.
But again, mostly vibes.
Mostly vibes. And then that's most of it. 8 days later, they name him Jesus and cut off the end of his penis. And then they take him to the temple and kill some birds to purify him and to make him holy to the Lord, which isn't a special thing for Jesus. Apparently, they were supposed to do that for all of the firstborn sons. A guy named Simeon. I don't know why this isn't ever in any of the nativity stories that I hear. I never heard about Simeon in the nativity stories, but it seems like a cool part of the story. He's in Jerusalem. He was told by the Holy Spirit that he would live to see the Messiah, and he goes to see the kid, and he's happy about that. And an old lady prophet named Anna praises Jesus. And then they scurry off back to Nazareth.
Yep.
The end.
And verse 39, when they had finished everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. So in Luke, they go back home to where they're from.
Yeah.
In Nazareth. So one or two discrepancies between Luke's account and Matthew's account.
Or two completely different and utterly unrelated stories.
Yes, that would be a better way, a more accurate way to put it. Yes, these are completely unrelated stories. And really the only thing that they share is that this was announced beforehand by an angel, and Jesus was born in Bethlehem because that's what the prophecy says.
Right.
Everything else is dealer's choice, and these two dealers chose very, very different stories.
Yeah, it's very clear that the authors of these two stories were not aware of each other. Like, whoever wrote second had not read the first one.
Yeah, not big on reading. But also I think it's interesting that in both Matthew and Luke, for the rest of the gospel, none of the details of these narratives pop up. Like there's the name Bethlehem never appears again. In fact, there are 8 total occurrences of the name Bethlehem in the entire New Testament. 7 of them occur in Matthew and Luke, and the other one is just a passing reference in John to the prophecy about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. The town is never mentioned anywhere else in the entire New Testament. And the miraculous events, it's not like, hey, remember when that cool thing happened? Nope. Nothing is mentioned from these miraculous events anywhere else in Matthew or Luke.
There you go. I mean, and there are some other points. There are some, looking at it, there are some points in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus is called Jesus of Nazareth or the Nazarene. So that's good. Like, it is important to make sure that he's from Nazareth, somehow. And then, in John, like you say, like John's all over the map. John's just back in the creation of the universe.
Yeah. And there are so many differences between John and the other gospels. One I think the most interesting is the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Jesus' ministry is 1 year. He basically is like, we're up in Galilee, we're down around here, we're doing this, we're doing that, we go to Jerusalem, and he gets killed.
Right.
John is a 3-year ministry. He's going back and forth. He's in Jerusalem, he's in Galilee, he's in Jerusalem. In fact, there's one chapter where he's in Jerusalem sermonizing, and then the text says, so then they crossed over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. It's
Jerusalem is nowhere near the Sea of Galilee.
Correct.
Okay.
It is a mess.
Okay. You mentioned that Paul doesn't talk about this at all. I think the closest it comes that I could find is in Galatians. Is that one of the real Paul ones or the fake Paul ones?
That is one of the real Paul ones.
In Galatians, he says, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law.
Yep.
That's as close as we get to Paul talking about the birth of Jesus.
Yeah, and the idea there seems to be to emphasize that Jesus came as a human, and tabernacled in actual flesh among us, and you can tell because he was born of a woman. Not a bird, not a stone, not a stork, not anything else.
I mean, it's the content of these two narratives is interesting, but the sort of the emphasis, what each of these two narratives is focused on is really interesting. You've got Matthew very clearly focused on bullet pointing different prophecies that this fulfills. And as you say, shoehorning in as much as he can to make it happen. And Luke seems much more interested in saying this was miraculous. This was amazing.
Yeah, it's all about people singing praises, whether it's John the Baptist's parents, whether it's Jesus' own parents, whether it's the shepherds, whether it's the angels. Everybody is singing praises to this young boy.
And nobody is killing all of the babies.
Yeah.
Or and there's
Herod's not even a part of the story. Yeah.
No.
There are no Magi, there's no Herod. He's not a good guy, he's not a bad guy. It just, hey, guess what happened when Herod was king? And does not play a role.
Yeah.
He's an NPC in the Lucan nativity.
Well, and as you say, wasn't even actually alive.
If this happened during Quirinius's census, yes, he was long gone. And some of the other traditions that people associate with the nativity, I mentioned earlier, Mary riding on a donkey,
right?
Which is a lot of the paintings you see of Mary traveling down to
all of the
to Judea. Yeah, it's Joseph walking, Mary riding on a donkey, gently caressing her belly. Yeah. That comes from the Proto-Evangelium or the Proto-Evangelium, the Proto-Gospel of James, or the Infancy Gospel of James, a pseudepigraphic 2nd century CE text. The notion that he was born in a cave. So particularly within the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, you'll see a lot more depictions of the nativity that are in caves. That is based on the Proto-Evangelium of James. There are a bunch of traditions that have worked their way into the nativity that are deriving from later non-canonical, frequently entirely rejected as heretical texts having to do with Jesus' birth. So, and the idea that Joseph brought children from a previous marriage, and this is why there are references to Jesus' brothers, and we can maintain the idea that Mary was perpetually a virgin. That comes from the same. So
interesting.
Yeah.
It is fascinating how many things I haven't heard all of those things, but the image of Mary on a donkey is indelibly printed into my brain.
Yeah.
And now that I've paid a lot of attention as I read through this, it's like, oh yeah, it doesn't say that. But thank goodness whoever the author of that James book, thank goodness someone came up with that, because the idea of a woman deep into her pregnancy making a 90-mile trek, give that woman a donkey.
Yeah, and I imagine the bathrooms on the way were not very clean. You can just see her as like, I need to pee again. And
oh my gosh,
like,
those
again?
Galilean rest stops are the worst.
They don't even have good energy drinks.
It's so true. All right, friends. Well, there you have it. I hope that your Christmas isn't entirely ruined. Go and take down all of your little creches, all of your nativity scenes, because they're wrong. You get to choose. You either get the wise men or you get the shepherds, but you can't have both. Actually, as we've talked about before, enjoy it as exactly as it pleases you.
Yeah, and I imagine that there are people out there who are like, "What the hell does Dan do on Christmas?" But I have my own translation of the New Testament that I'm doing for childhood readership. I read the nativity scenes from Matthew and from Luke, and we have each of our kids has their own nativity set, and we just talk about it. And I am perfectly open with them, saying this is a tradition. The two stories don't fit together perfectly. Probably didn't happen this way, and everybody's cool with it. We still enjoy celebrating Christmas and doing this little tradition of sharing the nativity story. So,
and then your kids go to church and get in trouble.
No, they don't get it. We they're more likely to get in trouble at school. From saying, Santa's not real, right? But
not only is Santa not real, your Jesus story is messed up. Actually, now that I think about it, I think it might be really fun to just take all of, there are lots of people who my mother-in-law included, who collect creches of the nativity scene.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to take the characters, like only allow wise men on one half of them and only allow shepherds on the other half of them, and like just separate it all out so that you've got the Matthew side versus the Luke side, and they can have a rumble.
I was just going to say, there's a whenever I lead tours in Israel and Palestine, we go to Jericho, which is a Palestinian territory, and there's a souvenir shop called Jimmy's. I think it's Jimmy's Bazaar. It might just be Jimmy's. But there's a guy there who works almost entirely in olive wood. But you can get $20,000, like 8 foot tall nativity sets carved entirely from olive wood, or down to the little tiny ones. And every time I go there, people always have a great time just looking at the many different types of nativity scenes they have there. But it's always such a treat for them to be in Jericho and looking at olive wood nativity scenes. And all right, well, that's lovely. I like that story. More stories. I'm going to promise that you and I are going to tell more of our Christmas stories in the after party for this episode. So anyone who is one of our $10 a month or more patrons over on patreon.com can join us over there. I encourage you all, if you can afford a little bit of extra dosh every month, come on over. The water's fine. Be a patron at patreon.com/Data Over Dogma. If you can't, that's totally fine. We will talk to you again next week. You can reach us at contact@dataoverdogmapod.com. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Data Over Dogma is a member of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. It is a production of Data Over Dogma Media, LLC, copyright 2024, all rights reserved.
Are you interested in the parts of history that remain a mystery? Do you want to learn more about the historical myths and misconceptions used to prop up false belief today? I'm Nathaniel Lloyd. In my podcast, Historical Blindness, I delve into all of these topics, sharing puzzling tales from the past and examining hoaxes, conspiracy theories, and misremembered events that provide insight into modern politics and religion. New episodes every 2 weeks. Find Historical Blindness on most podcast players and platforms.
Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Then the Sleep Cove podcast can help you. Hi, I'm Christopher Fitton, the voice and clinical hypnotherapist behind Sleep Cove. Sleep Cove features sleep hypnosis, meditations, and bedtime stories, all designed to help those of you who struggle at night to achieve a restful and peaceful night's sleep. Search for Sleep Cove on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see why Sleep Cove helps millions of people sleep deeply all night long.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.